Good afternoon, everyone. So what you see in front of you is a slide that says, and I should be able to see it too, working in teams can be. And if you want to respond, you can go to slido.com on your browser or on your phone, type in the hashtag ML03 and provide your response. And it'll be showing up on our computer screens, but not the final product, not the webinar, final webinar, unfortunately. But I'll be reading out some of the responses and then we'll begin the presentation. So the few people that have responded, invigorating, relationship building, rewarding, challenging, educational, fun has been said a few times, creativity, learning experience, rewarding, productive, challenging, feeds the spirit, time consuming, definitely, a blessing if everyone pulls their own weight. What's the hashtag? ML03. Go to slido.com, SLIDO.com. Stretching. Okay, so we get the idea that it runs a spectrum, and it takes effort and time and consistency to be a leader and to do well with teams. So with that in mind, thank you for coming to today's presentation. And I hope everyone is doing well and is healthy and safe indoors or wherever they may be. My name is Nikhat, and I'm the Social Sciences Librarian and Coordinator of the Diversity Alliance Residency Program at American University. I've had to read that for myself. I'm also an organization development consultant, so I work with libraries and universities, and I specialize in areas of change management, facilitation, team building, and among other things, so diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Oh, we're talking about my disclaimer first. And I added this recently based on some of the feedback that I was getting. So the models and the authors that I'm going to discuss today, they're from the field of organization development. And this is a practitioner-based field like library science, and that means both the authors that means that the authors are also consultants, and they have either a Master's of Science or a PhD in organization development. I'm an academic librarian, but I'm also a consultant, and with goals in the future to publish on topics of OD and LIS. I use these models only as awareness tools and nothing more than in this presentation setting. The field of organization development is, it has as many theories as library science has acronyms. And I'm going to discuss a few of them today as it relates to team building. In no way, shape, or form are these recommendations, they're not prescriptive, they're informational. And if you decide to use these, there should be a value, but these models and theories and frameworks were created for consultants, for the use by consultants in organizations. So they do have value, but their practical application is with the consultant. Okay. That said, we're going to be talking about team development and the relevant models or frameworks related to this area, and we're going to apply them practical application to libraries, and then we'll take some of your questions, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion hopefully, and some questions for you for time for questions. Okay. So I had one more slide. Oh, whoops, where did it go? Okay. Nope, I wasn't supposed to stop sharing. Sorry. Okay. All right, maybe this slide won't work. So I had another slide where I was asking your feedback about working in teams, about do you lead a team or are you, sorry, do you lead a group or a team? And that same hashtag was, and of course it didn't work. So we'll just go on and talk about what the difference is between a group and a team. So a group is an independent operator working in the same organization, having a common shared information and resources, but having independent individual goals. So if we think about it, a group is like the United States women's gymnastics team. They all have individual goals, and they all work together to support each other towards those individual goals, but they aren't necessarily a team. And a team is an interdependent group of individuals with a common organizational goal chosen by management, tasked with producing work within a particular time frame. And then within group itself, there's a formal group and an informal group. An informal group is created by management, and an informal group is naturally created, like the friends we make at work. So one important variable to all of this is the concept of trust. Did I skip over a slide? I did. Okay. Trust in particular enhances goal clarification, in its information exchange, problem solving, and a commitment to implementation, and enhances job satisfaction. And this is from Samir and Schmidt from the previous decade. Trust can be derived or developed through different aspects of one's organizational persona. And so there are three different areas of professional relationships. And the first is deterrence-based. So this relates to doing what you say, and meaning doing what you say because the consequences of not doing so can't be avoided, or the reward is gaining further trust. The other is knowledge-based, and knowledge-based is coming from the other person, getting to know the other person well, and relying upon their behavior. So if you think about an example of deterrent base would be, think about a past manager or administrator that didn't keep their word. And how did that impact your ability to trust them moving forward? And how do you continue to work with that individual if that trust is not there? An example of knowledge-based trust would be, think about your best friend at work. You know their behaviors, you trust them implicitly. The third is identification-based trust, where mutual understanding exists sufficiently to confidently act for one another. So an example of that is working in groups where you have your defined roles and you're able to support each other or cheer each other on. Okay. So if you have that background of having trust and having common definitions of trust, what you can do as a manager or leader is gather information about your team, and you can actually do this with your team. And so if you're familiar with SWOT or SWET, so this is a way to get to know your systems, see the growth areas, and then build on them as appropriate. In support of transparency and understanding, begin by learning or relearning about your team or group. Using one of these tools, it gives you a bigger picture of your organization. This is something that you can do as a precursor to on information towards team development. It also helps you to be open and inclusive. Building your team efforts based upon this data is going to help you make informed choices based on knowledge instead of assuming to know your team. The other variable here is that as someone who is playing the role of leading this effort, you have to you have to put aside your biases and knowledges of your team and see them as almost new individuals. And instead of making assumptions about, oh, well, they are always going to behave that way, or that person is always going to behave that way, you have to think about them in a more third-party perspective, hence the use of a consultant, because we don't have those internalized assumptions about people. So if you work on this as a team, that will actually help you develop towards that team development as well. One thing I would recommend is moving weakness as the last item. So using an appreciative inquiry stance, talk about strengths, talk about opportunities, talk about threats, but also leave weaknesses last, because those are naturally going to come up in conversation. And that way the conversation is still productive, but not weighted down with the negative. Let's see. So if it's possible within your own organization to find an outside facilitator to help you do this work in particular, that would be ideal. But if not, you can still do this, or you can actually do this possibly as an anonymous survey online. Okay. So I wanted to discuss two particular models, and I'm sure some of you are really familiar with them. The first is Chapman's forming, storming, norming, and performing. And it's been updated with another word. Adjourning is the final attribute. And then the other is groupy, which is goals, roles, process, and interpersonal relations. I was wondering if in the chat box, and I can't see my chat box right now, but is anyone familiar with these two? A few of you? Many of you, okay. All right, so we're gonna go through them a little bit, but then we're gonna apply them to libraries. Okay, doke? All right, so first we have Chapman. So, oops, that didn't move. There we go. So in forming, high dependence is based around the leader. So in a new group, people are gonna look for the leader. And in a new group, there's going to be a little agreement on the team. And so the aim is for the leader to play that role and take lead. Individual roles and responsibilities might be unclear. The leader must be prepared to answer a lot of questions in this phase and look to develop the team's purpose, objective, and even external relationships. And in this one, processes is kind of ignored, which is probably the weakness for this model. But it also is a test for the leader as well, in that sense of not just taking the lead, but also managing the team in a way that is accessible to all as well. The next is storming. So at this stage, decisions might not be made easily. Team members are sort of positioning for access to leadership. You might receive challenges from your team members in this position. So having a clear purpose is going to be helpful. And uncertainties might persist in this stage. And you might definitely have cliques that show up, or informal groups that are created here. So in this stage, focusing on goals and avoiding distracting informal groups or emotions or emotional issues, and thinking about compromise as well. So the next stage is norming. So this is where a group comes to a consensus and forms together as a team. And at this stage, they respond well to the facilitator or the facilitation by the team leader. Roles and responsibilities have become clear and accepted. Big decisions are made by group by agreement. Consensus is something that would fit into this conversation. And so the group has become, in a way, high functioning. So, and in this stage, the group is almost fun. They're going to engage in social outings, possibly, or even social activities. And discussion is deeper. It has developed, the group has developed their processes and their styles, and they've sort of settled into that. Okay. So that was norming. Performing. This stage is strategically, so that you've fully moved on to being a high functioning team at this stage. The team has a shared vision and is able to stand on its own feet with no interference of participation from leadership. So the leadership is there, but the team itself is able to do the work on their own. So the team has gained and earned a degree of autonomy. And while there may be disagreements, that work is still resolved in a productive manner versus a destructive manner or derailing manner. And relationships and how work is done is seamless or integrated. So, and team members look at each other and know their strengths and know their weaknesses and are able to support each other in those endeavors. And then finally, and this is new as of 1975, and this is again a relatively old model, but it's still highly applicable to all fields of that work in teams. So adjourning is concluding the team. So if you are working in a project, or if you are transitioning to maybe another work type structure, giving people the space to say goodbye or to conclude the work and to show that the work has been successful, having that marker, I forgot the word, that acknowledgement that the purpose of the work has been fulfilled and that though your group is moving on, having an opportunity to conclude and give each other a closure is actually beneficial to not just the team, but the greater organization as well. Okay, that's Tuckman's model. I'm going to stop here for just a second, see if you have any questions about this model in particular, and see if I can get the chat box back up. No questions? Okay. If anyone has assessed it from a, so lots of questions. Okay. So is the adjourning phase truly necessary? That depends on your organization. If you're a smaller organization, that might be less relevant, but if you work in a larger library, giving people the space and grace to give accolades to their successes is beneficial to the organization. And there was a question about this model, can it be used for projects only? So the models can be really applied to not just a project, but really to a team or a short-term group of work. So you can make use of the models in really not just projects, but in informal departmental settings as well. It's just think of it as constantly gathering information about your team. As you sit and observe how people interact, think about where you are at that stage and see where you can further develop. If you're at stage norming, then how do you get your team to perform better? What variables are needed? What can you do to support them? Is that a question that you've asked that of your team? And do they have answers? So that back and forth and constant data collection. And by data collection, meaning really talking to your people and seeing what their needs are and how they can perform better based on not just your communication to them, but the growing trust of just you asking them, what do you need and how can I help you? So I hope I answered those questions. Let me see if I missed anything. Wonder what happens when different team members are at different stages of the model. That is something that will likely occur. So that is something to work through, whether that's individually for that one team member or with the help of your team. So if you have a straggler, for the lack of a better word, then how do you work with that individual? What is it that they need to move forward into that next stage? And have you had that conversation or discussion with them? Again, it's building trust by asking questions, but also following through to see how you can support that individual. Because moving forward is easier to move forward with everybody on board than it is to have everybody but one. And that one person will drag down that team. Okay, and there's another model mentioned here. How do you think this applies for teams that already work together, such as a search committee? Team building, even in something like a search committee, doesn't hurt, especially if you have membership from outside your department, which might be the case for search committees. I'm on a search committee where I have currently 2 faculty members, and the rest of the search committee is all women, and there are 2 men. There's a learning curve with that one, right? So it doesn't hurt, especially if you're in a team that is maybe speaking, for lack of a better word, 2 different languages. Does model give way to groupthink? In what way? Rachel, if you want to respond back to that. Okay, so when does norming become performing? That will be on when does norming become performing? That will be something you have to measure based on knowing your team. So if you're tracking how your team is moving forward, that should become clear to you. And again, if you're keeping your eye from being biased and keeping an open mind about how your team has grown or adjusted to the work that they're doing. Okay, so I don't want to lose out on any more time, but we'll come back to questions in just a little bit. Thanks, everyone. Oh, Rachel. Okay, if one person kind of takes over the group in the forming stage, then they are going to influence in the norming phase. And is that groupthink? Not necessarily. With every group, there is going to be someone who is going to take the lead or take up more space. So as a leader, how do you give people who aren't as vocal that space or time? For example, if you're an introvert, you need that reflection time to provide feedback. So how do you work within your team to give those other individuals that space to speak up and remind the vocal individual that this is a team effort? So think about that and what you can do for your particular team in relation to that. Okay, thanks for the questions. Let's continue. Okay, so that was Chapman, and this is Richard Backhard's grippy model. So goals, roles, my window is above the next word, process, and interpersonal relations. And this is also a relatively older model. Let me see. So with goals, the goals is going to be the foundation of a good teamwork by establishing a core mission and a framing for purpose. So if you think about it, this is really the foundation to your work. So setting goals for a team, helping them define what they want, and making individual efforts connect back to the foundation. Roles are, where'd we go? So making sure everyone has clear defined roles. So in team-based work, especially, well, not so much in librarianship, In librarianship, our roles are pretty defined, but in team-based work, we might work together, and giving each other that little space to grow, even if we are working together, is something that we can always keep an eye open about. So thinking about the roles, or in addition, if one person is constantly taking on the role of leader, how do you give the others that same opportunity to grow in those arenas, and give those who are leading to be better team players? So finding those opportunities and seeing that for yourself as a manager or leader, and giving people space to grow and challenge themselves in that arena as well. Hold on a sec. Okay, so process is in organizations. To look at your processes, decision-making, control, coordination, communication, and seeing if they are, one, inclusive, and if they are effective and supportive of the team's goals. So, and I think that's probably one area that I have found that we can all grow in, is how we do process and how we document process is, in my experience, somewhat challenging. I think because even though our calendar is pretty cyclical, except for maybe this semester, and pretty expected, you know what's going to happen fall semester, you know what's going to happen spring semester, but our workload, nevertheless, process seems to go to the wayside. And in my experience, process is really a second foundation to your work as well. So having clear communication, constructive ways of dealing with conflict, and having clear decision-making processes identified and vetted through your team, so that if you do come to a roadblock where consensus, for example, isn't happening, then you have a process in place to deal with that variable versus talking it out for days or weeks at a time. And then last is interpersonal. And that is just going back to, again, to trust, open communication, feedback, and support in your work environment. But also that trust includes encouraging creativity, opportunity to try new and different things, that space for trial and error, and that diverse contribution may actually discourage groupthink, that question our colleague Rachel was asking about. So how does one do that? Simple gestures like really listening and asking for feedback, or asking for discussion, or providing, having the team provide input into some decision-making areas. And also giving immediate acknowledgement to the group's success, instead of waiting till the end, if it's appropriate. Give them the credit where it's due, whether it's to the team or larger public venues. Okay. So there are many other models that exist, and I did want to show you one other model, and I sort of give a list of them here. So the most current model that I think a lot of libraries are using is Drexler-Sibbitt's team performance model. And that one's really a great one for a project-oriented work. And the team performance model is a 7-step model of orientation, trust building, goal clarification, commitment, implementation, that same space of high performance, and then renewal. So resolving to understand and continue the work, and then beginning again to orientation, or concluding the work and concluding the team. The spiral is, the group spiral is something from Matt Minahan. And it's something he created that has a number of questions that a leader can use to, and it's similar to Drexler-Sibitz, to ask yourself as you're working towards creating a team, which is also something similar to Drexler-Sibitz: entry, expectations, establishment, effectiveness, evolution, and exit. So you can see a theme of beginning, setting expectations, doing the work, becoming an effective team, evolving into a high-performing team, and then concluding the work. And that'll be the case with also the integrated group model, integrated group dynamics model. This third model, mastering virtual teams, I'm actually not that familiar with, but it is, that's the name of the book as well. So if you're interested in considering the times, if you're interested in learning more about that, it's the authors are Durante and Snyder. Okay. So we have the theories. So how do you take this into practical application? How do you apply this to your everyday interactions with your team or group? So one of the things I ask you to consider is that the data that you've collected using these previous models is look for the common themes. What is it that you see, and what is it that you see is lacking? So, excuse me. So if you visualize these models as an empty bookshelf, and as you've collected the data, you start shelving those books up. And then if you step back, you should be able to see where your successes are as a team and where your challenges are as a team. And as the team leader or as management or leadership, what is it that you want or need to improve, if anything, about that team? So identify that next step and then integrate that next step, that next action into your next meeting or retreat. So this process that we've sort of done is related to something called the action research cycle. And I've been sort of using that as an internal guide for my own framework. So we've identified the problem, and that's team development. We have collected data and learned more about our team. We have gathered findings and we've analyzed the information, or we have an understanding of what your team needs based on the data. So next is developing a thoughtful intervention or a course of action. So what I decided to do was, because we're not going to be able to do a full day retreat, we don't have that kind of time, and at least at this semester, we're all at different locations. So I've thought of examples that might be viable for your organization, whether it was in a meeting or in potentially a retreat type setting. So these are all examples that I've used in my own work as a consultant. So find a common question to ask everyone. So before a meeting starts, before your agenda, before you get deep into the work, ask everyone, how are they doing? So one example that I thought of today was, how has everyone been managing the work from home thing? Other questions, if you have small groups of 20 or so and you have the time, or you're making the time to commit to getting to know your team members, think about what questions to ask. And you know these individuals, and you know some of their own hobbies and activities, or animals, or family members. Ask them something about that and see how others respond. And learn about each other. And in doing so, you're making space for trust to grow, but also to have your members trust each other as they learn about each other. In a retreat type setting, if that maybe happens this summer or before the fall semester, think about sharing something about yourself that that your team members might not know about you. So one example I've used in the past is during a retreat, I had, I think, 25 or 30 people in the room, and we did 3 circles going around the room, and we asked each of them, tell us something about your past that we don't know. And then the second round was, tell us something about you presently that we don't know. And the third was, tell us something that, I think it was a goal or something related to you in the future, like a 5-year goal. And then of course, there's always the conversation questions of what are your hobbies? That would surprise us. So as you get to know your team, you're going to be able to connect with them more, because some of these answers, they will surprise you, and you get to see not a one-dimensional or two-dimensional person, but a person that has many different hobbies and many different possibly ways of thinking that they're maybe not bringing to work. So if you think about the artist, but they work in the sciences, there's an intersection there, and there's definitely a conversation there. So these are all examples, and they're, again, not prescriptive, but a jumping off point for you to know your own team and to figure out how you can talk to your team and how your teams can learn from each other. All right. Okay, so that's actually about it. I had a couple of book recommendations or articles, the Mastering Virtual Teams, since it is the sign of the times. And there's a HBR Harvard Business Review article called Turn Your Group into a Team. And that link is provided there, but you all should be able to find it pretty easily considering the work we do. Okay, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. And if my moderators will tell me what question to answer.
Yes, hi. So we do have a couple questions that we didn't get to earlier. I'll start with one about Chapman's model.
Okay.
There was a question, has anyone assessed that from a feminist or marginalized people's point of view, since it is something that is an older model?
Not to my knowledge, but it's not something I've researched.
Okay. Another question we got was, how do you approach defensive reactions by individuals, such as denial, deflection, rationalization, intellectualization, minimization, and so on?
The first question is if that's a reoccurring behavior. Is that something that you want to address in the team, or is that something you need to address as a behavior problem? If this behavior is impacting the team, that is something to consider to address within the team itself. So if that problem is impacting the work of the team, working together with the team to understand what the concern is and working with those individuals to really surface the issues versus maybe ignoring that individual and saying they'll get it sooner or later. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. So this was based on a comment that someone put in the chat, but what if you personally find some of those getting to know you questions intrusive? Like, how would you respond to that?
I let the I let the members know that it's their choice to respond. The past, present, future question. There was one individual on that team that decided not to answer the future question, and that was fine. The rest of the team members didn't take any offense to that. So set the safety and set the expectation that it is safe to not respond if they're not comfortable doing so.
Okay, great, thank you. Which model do you find to be the most successful?
I don't think I can answer that. Consultants aren't supposed to have favorite models. That was drilled into me early. Do I have other favorite models? Yes, I do, but I don't have a favorite team building model.
All right, fair enough. Question, what's a good way to restart a team working on a project that's been on hiatus for a while without recreating previous work done? Rather to build on it, but refresh people on that work.
So think about where you stopped and think about reviewing that work. And then as a team leader or the department chair or whatever, set the goals for continued work. So update the charge to say, this is where we were, and this is the expectation for the work to continue. And of course, give them space and time to ask questions, but then also have have agreement from the team with themselves and to you that it is understood that you're moving forward from this point and not reinventing the wheel back from 6 months ago.
Okay. Let's see. Do you approach individual members of teams differently depending on their length of experience? For example, librarians right out of school versus those who may be new to your workplace but are perhaps 10 years into a profession.
I think that's an individual decision. So I work with new librarians. I supervise new librarians. So I provide more context and I provide more opportunity for them to ask me questions about their work, about meetings, about whatever have you. And I think the same would apply with people new to the organization, maybe less so because they have worked in the field for 10 plus years. But every organization is different, and how they interact and engage can be jarring for new employees, especially if the environment is not as open or trusting. So play it by ear depending on your organization.
All right. And this is a question about managing up. How do you handle a supervisor who can't effectively pull a team together?
How do you handle a manager who can't effectively pull their team together? So you've been managing up this individual, I assume. So if that's the case, if you're supporting your manager, what is it that you need your manager to do that they aren't doing? And is it something that you can help them with? And if you're helping them, is it going to impact you in a positive way or a negative way? Because sometimes if we step out of bounds, that impact is real. So think about those things, and if it's something that you observe, or is it something that's observable in most of your other team members, maybe don't always let it be you, or if it is you, think about having these as private conversations, helping your manager do their work and not public conversations, so that you also keep confidentiality of your support.
Okay, thank you. Have you found any models, have you found the models you mentioned to be equally successful in a virtual setting?
I think they can be. And this semester has become a whole new world. So I think these opportunities exist as we're using Zoom. We can engage in, to some degree, especially storming, for example, if we're talking about Chapman's model, or that teaming function of getting a team to connect, having some sort of casual engagement versus serious work day in and day out, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. So having that space to be silly for just a few minutes before you settle into the work.
Okay. Is there a good resource for witnessing real team activities? The canned dialogue in many training videos is not representative, and many of us went straight from individual instruction to a collaborative work environment where we work in a semi-isolated and currently totally isolated environment.
So are there examples of team-based work out there?
Good resources for seeing real team activities as opposed to like training videos where they find the dialogue to be not representative.
Very true. If you'll send me your email address with that question, I can see if there are things that exist, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head at the moment. But my head is pretty empty at the moment as well.
Okay, well, and the last question we have in there was, will the slides be shared, which we are recording this and we'll be sharing the recording out widely, so you should be able to get them through that as well. So are there any other questions? We still have plenty of time left if anybody has other questions they'd like to ask. Oh, here's one. What strategies do you have for a member that may be team averse?
It depends on the situation. Is it a short-term responsibility? Do they volunteer? Is it just being a division member for the department? Think about those questions, and if they're verbally adverse to doing team-based work, have a conversation, get the backstory. What's holding them back, or what's holding them in from contributing to the work? I think part of the misunderstandings in team-based work is just not knowing and not asking those curiosity questions. And as we continue to do team-based work, that has to be an important factor that every manager and leader has to investigate, especially if it is holding your team back.
Okay, and we have another one. How can you use these approaches to help team members learn the importance of lifelong learning and professional development?
I'm trying to figure out how those are connected, and they are, but my brain hasn't wrapped around that just yet. So I think with every team-based work, there is inherent learning, whether it's about each other, about the project, about the process. So think about either beginning, middle, or even end of your team-based work, a reflection piece, asking your team members either as discussion or in some other format, asking about their learning in that work, maybe at the postmortem of that team-based work. Like, what did you all learn, and how are you taking that learning to your next responsibility or your next team project? Something to consider.
Great. And is there an ideal team size?
I think a group, a small group is about 12 or less. So I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't think a team is as large or as small as one can manage. And some divisions are 30 people strong. Some divisions are 5 people big. So it depends on the organization, because those are things that are outside of a manager's, for example, ability of control, locus of control. So I'm going to say it depends on the organization.
All right.
I've been using that line a lot. Sorry, guys.
Can you share some appreciative inquiry questions for library staff?
I think with the appreciative inquiry, you can just think about whatever question you have, ask about the positives first. So if you're doing a Delta Plus, do the pluses first. And the deltas, the challenges, and the things that you want to take action on can happen next. So you can see the successes, you can see the positives in the pluses, and then that conversation of the challenges, the deltas, can still occur. So that space is given to both, but not necessarily overwhelmed with the negative.
Great, thank you. I've been in teams where certain personalities in the group or team knowingly or unknowingly pull at the group's direction and processes. How are ways to manage these sorts of difficulties that arise?
Okay. So if there's a team leader and it's not that individual, think about checking in with the charge or checking in with a team leader so that they can rein back the topic to the charge or to the agenda at hand. And that takes a leader who's comfortable pulling rank on someone possibly as well. So let's say if you're distracted by, let's say you're doing work on buying a product for libraries or something, and the rest of the team is distracted by cost. And so they keep bringing up the cost of this, that, and the other. And it's not a variable in your decision making. So take cost off the table. Say we're not discussing it further. and continue discussing the products for what they have to offer. And since that, in that way, the discussion is about the agenda for this example and not about factors that you have no control over.
All right, those are all the questions we have. So Chris, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure thing. Let's say thank you so much to Nikhat, as well as all of you for attending. In addition, I'd also like to thank my co-moderator and the rest of the ACRL Instruction Section Management and Leadership Committee, and of course, Gina at ACRL. Remember that we will be sending out the link with the recording for this session as soon as possible. One final thing, I do want to plug the next webinar from the ACRL Instruction Section that I mentioned previously. Next one will be Managing Up with EDI in Mind, Collaborations to Strengthen a Community. That will be held Thursday, April 2nd, 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. And will be presented by Maisha Carey and Meg Grotti from the University of Delaware. So we hope that you will sign up for that. I believe we have the information on that in the chat. So you can just click on that link to sign up if that sounds interesting. And that's all we have. So thank you all again for coming, and stay healthy.
Thanks, guys.